This is the eLearn podcast. If you're passionate about the future of learning, you're in the right place. The expert guests on this show provide insights into the latest strategies, practices, and technologies for creating killer online learning outcomes. My name's Laddick, and I'm your host from OpenLMS. The eLearn podcast is sponsored by eLearn Magazine, your go-to resource for all things online learning. Click-by-click how-to articles, the latest in EdTech, a spotlight on successful outcomes and trends in the marketplace. Subscribe today and never miss a post at elearnmagazine.com. And OpenLMS, a company leveraging open source software to deliver a highly effective, customized, and engaging learning experience for schools, universities, companies, and governments around the world since 2005. Learn more at openlms.net. Hi there, I'm Laddick. This episode is part of a live, real-time series that I recorded at the 2022 EDUCAUSE conference in Denver, Colorado. In this conversation, I speak with Randall Shore from Kion about all things cloud computing and how to make sure you're able to manage it effectively at your institution. And just a quick reminder, you can make sure to never miss an episode of this podcast by subscribing at elearnmagazine.com. Now, I give you Randall Shore.
We're now back again with Randall Shore of Kion. Excellent. We're going to talk about. I'm going to move this out of the way. And so I want to first tee you up as what tell me. Let's get a little plug. What is Kion? What do you do? And what services are you offering in the education space right now?
Sure. Yeah. So obviously with Kion, Kion is we call it a cloud enablement platform. It really combines sort of cloud management and cloud governance together. And so really what that means to us is that we're focused in sort of four main areas. So financial management, continuous compliance, identity, and automation orchestration within the public cloud. So AWS, Azure, and Google. And so my role there, I run what we call our delivery and support team, which is really the technical side of the customer journey. So I work with everybody from prospects who are first seeing the product all the way through to onboarding, implementation, support, training. All that falls under myself and my team. And so specifically on the higher ed side, we are actually really excited. So we actually just last week announced a partnership with Internet2. So we went through a service evaluation where we were vetted for sort of everything we do across accessibility and functional eval and contracting and everything for the higher ed community. And so there are a number of areas that we really sort of work with in higher ed. So my background, I should also point out, before I was at Kion, I actually was director of IT at George Washington University. And so I know I mentioned it on LinkedIn actually, but like in my interview for this position, I said to my boss, who's CEO Brian, I was like, I'm either going to buy a license of Kion because I need it at GW, or I'm going to come work for you. And obviously that's where I am here. But really what we see is cloud adoption is definitely growing in higher ed, right? And there's many things that stalls cloud adoption, namely like cost overruns are always the major thing. There's always a concern from security that now, it's already hard enough to protect in a higher ed institution's network on campus, but now that you've extended that, across the U.S. or across the world, how do you enable researchers to use a lot of those cloud services? And so, sort of all of those areas are where we fit in. I'm happy to talk in specific.
I was just going to say, I think you just ruined the entire interview.
I was going to say, I didn't shut up, but I'm sorry. the copy's kicked in.
I love it. No, so I want to start kind of backwards, forwards, because I always seem to end these conversations with the data privacy question.
Yep.
I want to put that front and center now because I know the number one thing that hits my desk or comes in is like the cloud is scary, right? Because I don't know what my stuff is, and even people are there was a time there where kind of everybody didn't care, but Facebook people are backing away from it. Instagram, they're backing away. I mean, maybe not the younger generation, but there's a lot of concern around it. And then when we talk about student data, it's HIPAA data. It's not only there's a lot of payments data, there's self-identifying data, all that kind of stuff. So talk to me around why we shouldn't be scared of the cloud. First of all, we're not. I mean, we're all kind of in it, but what your presentation today is about how do you have a well-managed range? Talk to us about privacy in specifics. Like, I'd love to either hear some best practices or some fails or something like that.
Right. No, absolutely. I think when people think of the cloud, what you're not realizing and what a lot of folks don't realize, or maybe where their underlying fear comes from, is like when you hand over access keys to an account or a user to an account, you essentially have given them a key to their own data center, the world's most powerful, largest data center in the world. It's a good luck, right? Don't screw it up. And so really where success comes from is obviously why we're in this space is governance, right? A good governance model where, you can only go as far as an organization is comfortable to allow you to do that, right? And so typically, that gets into different compliance programs, like, what exactly is HIPAA or FERPA or something saying about cloud? I think where the challenge then comes from that is all these compliance programs that are out there to protect data are guidance and suggestions, right? None of them are playbooks. None of them say, to put health information in the cloud, go in and check this box and have this control and everything, right? And so it's the work that it takes to take this sort of guidance that says, things like only authorized people should have access to that data. Well, what does that mean, right? That means that we need to make sure we have good cloud identity, that only the folks that should see that data can have that data. We need to make sure that, we don't have S3 buckets open to the world, like sort of those easy underlying things. And so that's a lot of what we do at Kion, when I work with customers all day, is to secure that.
Well, how many people know what an S3 bucket is?
Right.
So, so take me there, like when you're having at your level, at the VP level, you're talking with CTOs, CIOs, these kinds of individuals. How far down the chain do you need to go to create comfort, to create trust, and just sort of that, like bring people in sort of an education or university setting? Is it just down to the dean level? Do you have to all the way go down to the professors, the students?
So typically, so far at least, we haven't had to. I've spent many years working down at the professor level and the research lab level and the PI level, but thankfully at Kion, right? It's sort of more, one of the things that specifically like at say like the C level or like the dean level, right, is really what having those controls in place don't just help with cloud adoption. Really where it means and matters to them is it helps you ultimately be able to apply for and ultimately get new research grants, right? And so working with, especially a lot of the R1s and R2s, that ability to say, like, listen, if we provision an entire environment that is HIPAA ready or, complies with CMMC if you're using federal data or whatever, that is what ultimately enables cloud, right? That you're not handing over this data center, right? You're giving exactly what they need and only what they need in a self-service manner, because ultimately most folks understand, like, if you put control in higher ed, often leads to, especially for sort of the academic side, to go around it, right? It means that they're going to swipe their P card and go out and get an AWS account or whatever, and ultimately IT loses all control. And so there's a delicate balance between sort of control and experience, and I think that's, again, obviously not just about Kion, but one of the major things that leads to, going back to my session, which is actually tomorrow at 4 o'clock.
Sorry.
Yes, no worries. So if you're here, 4 o'clock tomorrow, room 601. But outside of that, I think that's really what leads to that sort of well-managed range, right? Is that, all of your fences are intact. You're not having any animals on the other side.
Right.
That's essentially what.
But in this universe of academia, do you find that they're like, where do those entrepreneurs show up? Because, again, the mindset is still like, all right, look, there's a structure, this is traditional, we know what and that's been one of the big resistance to transformation writ large, right? And so, where are those people at? Like, are there tons of them everywhere? It just depends on the personality?
So I will say, like, especially cloud, higher ed and our commercial customers and our federal customers, it is not just another thing that's tacked onto somebody's plate. We're seeing a lot of organizations develop like a cloud team that's responsible for understanding the academic mission, the research mission, the administrative mission, how to run the business, and ultimately, whether that's to close data centers ultimately, or really to bring all of this sort of cutting edge technology to the classroom or to the students or to the research labs, this cloud team is sort of responsible for it. And so that's often falling somewhere in the IT organization. But ultimately it requires, and again, depending upon, and then it's one of the parts of the session tomorrow is, talking about models, right? Is it decentralized? Is it centralized? do we need to get buy-in at the school level? And ultimately, in a decentralized model, you do.
Right.
And it's that balance to say, we call it guardians at the gate a lot, right? We're not coming in cloud governance, cloud management, cloud enablement, right? The reason we sort of call it cloud enablement is to go against this idea of like guardians at the gate, right? You don't want to be a no person. The whole point of cloud is to enable an organization to move forward, putting in controls because of whether it's fear or you're not prepared or you don't know how to take the security controls matrix that HIPAA has and apply it to actual policy. That gets difficult, right? And so that's where we want to make sure that you're enabling them, not to overuse the word, but you're enabling them to move forward quicker or faster and get to the actual benefits of it. And so again, that can happen anywhere, but it's painting that vision across all levels of that organization, namely though within sort of this cloud team that's being developed.
So take me to the next bucket, for lack of a better term, of financial management, essentially. Because I know, I'll plug our company, OpenL. That's one of the things that we think about a lot because we host on AWS as well. And it's like, so how do you take down the server time, these things? What is that conversation first? Is it just kind of like, hey, we've got this license and and so now it's just kind of go hog wild and do whatever you want. What are the points in the conversation, and how do you mitigate those points? What's the best practice there?
Absolutely. So cloud. That's outside of all of the security controls and concerns and everything like that. Right? Nothing scares an organization more than
because I mean, it's like here's the
it's a blank check.
Exactly. Here's the blank check, and you kind of go for it.
Exactly.
Especially like a research team or whatever. They're just like hungry.
And so there's not just the I don't want to spend more than I have. There's the when I'm legitimately spending what I do have, how do I attribute this back? Right. I've got researchers who are using grants. I've got department budgets. I've got startup funds and 5-year planning funds and everything. Like, how do I do all this cost attribution? Right. And that is very much sort of where and why we developed Kion. We actually spun out of sort of the federal government initially, and so we actually spun out of a government systems integrator, worked on what ultimately became Kion as a small program for this agency that had a desire to move 10,000 developers to the cloud, and they needed to know that they weren't going to overrun, they weren't going to violate in the federal space. There's an Anti-Deficiency Act which says it's illegal to spend money you don't have. So they were like, well, we can't just write a blank check, right? There has to be an upper limit.
Isn't that everywhere it's illegal to spend money?
One would wish, but ultimately you just have to figure out how to pay for it, right? Or take out a loan or whatever. But so that's sort of like a big strength of ours is not just sort of all the security controls, but cost attribution. So knowing that this researcher who's going to use this has $5,000 from this grant, and ultimately being able to run a report at the end of the month and say, I know I owe AWS $1 million and Azure $1 million and Google. Where do I pull those, that $3 million from, right?
Wow.
How do I get to that? And so
that right there, like all of the parts just clicked in my head about the complexity, and especially in like a large research university. Did you just scare the crap out of a lot of people listening? And like, is that hard to manage? I mean, Kion is a platform that helps do this, but do I have to draw a lot of lines there, or how does that even begin to work?
Yeah, so honestly, outside of having tools, whether it's Kion or anything else, it's a crowded market for a reason, right? It is a complex problem that every organization has. Very few organizations say, okay, we just have one cloud budget, everybody just spend it and we'll figure out how to pay for it, right? And so there are native solutions in every cloud provider that allows you to say, set up an email when I spend a certain amount of money or something like that. The attribution, though, to understand that from this pot of money, from this, cost center inside of my institution, that is funding these 3 workloads, which ultimately are these applications, and that is again a lot of why Kion exists, what sort of problems we're trying to solve, whether it's for higher ed or anybody. But obviously, it's more complicated when everybody has sort of this bring your own sort of checkbook to the table. And again, right, all of that I'm always going to go back to the customer experience, especially in higher ed, because if it's not a self-service experience, if it's not easy, if it takes 3 weeks to get a new cloud account, your researcher is just going to go around you, right?
Yeah,
and that
sure,
ultimately opens you up for a world of disaster later. And then you got to try to figure out how do I consolidate everything too. So that is that nut can continue to crack. Yeah. There's a lot of shells there. Yeah.
I don't know what question to ask.
Yeah.
What's the third bucket?
Man, so I guess the next thing is probably on the identity piece. So, managing identity in higher ed, I know, again, my background, when I came to Kion as a product company, this first product company I worked for, I was like, we need to get identity right if we're going to ever enter higher ed. Higher ed is the only place where, on a good path, right? 25% of your population turns over every year. Right. You have a whole new set every 6 months, every new semester. Most software vendors on the market, right, are thinking about a commercial enterprise where you hire, you fire, nothing's crazy. When you build for something like that, not only do you have this huge sort of new population of students or staff or faculty that you're hiring, you have all the people that are graduating or leaving for one reason or another. And so being able to not just make it so, again, it's really easy for folks to get in when they should, but more importantly, how do you cut off access when they leave, right? And so that's a really big area for us, especially in the higher ed space, is unifying identity across all three cloud providers, right? And so everything that we do, we really do for sort of at least two main areas, is visibility and control, right? Everything I've been talking about, controlling spend, ensuring that they're not using services and regions and things that don't comply with HIPAA, being able to do financial management, right? That's all control. But ultimately, from that, the benefit to the business or the institution is visibility, right? What am I spending across? How much am I spending in AWS versus Azure? What department within the School of Engineering is spending more than another, right? And being able to drill in, then ultimately, obviously, everyone's favorite topic in the cloud then becomes cost savings. So once you get visibility, then what do you do with that, right? And so, not to go back to cost, but yeah, identity is I'd say a huge piece for higher ed that we're really working on.
How do these applications bleed over into corporate relationships after higher ed? Journeys for students, or connecting learning staff teaching staff with, again, professional opportunities, or because a lot of professors will either moonlight and have consulting gigs or whatever. How does that, what's the mesh there?
For sure. So it's actually funny. So one of the, I know, again, working at GW, there was always that conversation, especially when we introduced the tool into the student population, was the pedagogy, right? Are you affecting? If you make something too easy in the classroom where a student just goes, they click a button and everything just happens for them, and they expect that when they get into the workforce they're going to have the same button to click and it's just going to happen, and it's not, right? And so how do we not make that easy button too much of an easy button? Ultimately, is sort of what that is. And again, going back to my, I mentioned my interview where I'm like, I'm going to buy a license or you're going to hire me, right? I was trying to solve a problem where my data science program at GW was just getting off the ground, and they needed access to high performance computing. And ultimately, I had an option of, do I go to somebody like Dell or whatever, and I buy a cluster and I have a big capital expense and it's got to work, but maybe the class is only going to use it for one semester, right? It's not taught every semester. And so that was really my first use from the cloud makes sense, right? But it's also scary. So what if I were to amortize those lease payments down to a semester? What is that going to cost me? And ultimately, what else will I gain out of that? And one of the biggest things was, now we're gaining real life experience for these students or data scientists that when they go out to an organization, most of the time that they're crunching those numbers, they're going to be using the public cloud, right? And so again, one of the ways in which we sort of handle that at Kion, and not to completely keep plugging Kion, but it's my background, I think, in this area that's helping with how a lot of the product decisions are made sort of at the time. So I've been at Kion now for 3.5 years, and we're 4 years old. So a lot of that has come from that. But it's to not sort of put a layer between Kion and the cloud provider, right? Mm-hmm. Our goal is to give you that cloud native experience, specifically for whether it's you're already in a commercial organization and there's you already know how AWS works or Azure works or Google works or whatever. We don't want you to have to learn something new, but ultimately in the higher ed space that translates to student experience, right? How do you give, again, what the thought of giving a student a cloud account is frightening for a lot of institutions. Still, they haven't quite embraced it for the academic side as much from what I've seen.
Break that down though. When you're saying giving them, layman's terms, giving them
Giving them a login.
Google Drive, giving them
So this is
giving
like
them a login to what?
Yeah, giving them a login to like the AWS console, where they can technically spend thousands of dollars in seconds, right?
Right.
And like you can spend literally.
Is there really high demand for that? Is that a big?
So, like, I think an example is like the data science program, right? They want to use high performance computing clusters. They don't want to buy that, and there's awesome services. And I think more and more, public cloud itself is not about somebody else's data center, right? It's about managed services, and so managed services allow you to spin up you have a huge data set and you need to store it somewhere quickly, whether that's raw storage or you need to be able to throw it in a DynamoDB or something like that from AWS as a managed sort of high throughput database, right? Like previously you had to go about building that, and that might have actually stopped a faculty member from, say, putting that into their curriculum because they don't want to spend 2 weeks building something.
Right.
Now, you literally log in, you click a button, say, I want this, and it's provisioned for you in seconds, and you get off to the races, right? And so more and more, I think professors will bring it more into the classroom, but having that native experience so that students aren't just learning how to data science, they're also learning how to use the tools that you're going to use when you get out in the workforce to data science later. Yeah.
What opportunities have you seen on the other side? And I don't even know if this is a valid question, of those public data sets. Some of the research I've seen in the past are large scale data sets from like mobile phone companies, banking. It's been anonymized, but then you can look at so many different things, from migration pathways to what people are buying, or when they're buying, like when there's like a flu outbreak or something.
Right.
Are those opportunities being presented more and more? Like I'm just thinking of the instance you just described, where all right, my students need a data set to work on, and we have a problem set.
Yep.
So are those just already out there and you can click it?
Yeah, so there's a number of those. And then I also know that there's also like programs within the cloud providers themselves that are basically funding you to run your research on open data sets. So, for example, one of our customers is NASA. NASA and AWS have a partnership on like this open data registry, these ODR projects, where taking NASA data, satellite imagery, AWS is storing it for them for free so that folks can go in and sort of process that, right? Do geospatial analysis that is way beyond anything I know, right? I know that, like,
come on, give yourself some credit.
Exactly. But like, I know that, those kinds of partnerships is all about enabling, right? I know, even an interesting thing, like on the health side, there's so much data out there that ultimately we have the technology, we have the machine learning to like compute and crunch, that obviously the cloud is like powering and enabling. Ultimately what it comes down to is more of like society's willingness to share it because of all of the ways in which data has been used improperly over a few years, right? And so exactly. Like the accumulation of bad has potentially stifled some of the good, right? Like potentially there's enough health information out there and enough compute power to crunch it that like the cure for cancer is possible, just people won't share enough data, right? Like those kinds of things become possible in the cloud, not just because they're building products and solutions and services for it, but ultimately like an organization to crunch something of that size on their own is such a large capital investment that they just wouldn't do it, right? And so it's economies of scale sort of kicking.
So we're at EDUCAUSE. We're talking about, you're interfacing with all your higher ed clients or looking for new ones. What are the 3 biggest things that an institution like George Washington University gets wrong? Educate them about in your talk about how do you keep this well managed? Like what are those things?
Yeah, I mean, I think the 3 major things are cost attribution, right? There's a lot of organizations that are in the cloud and frankly just don't even know how to pay their bill, and that is ultimately slowing them down from moving forward. I think the other big one is sort of, as I mentioned, for like the R1s and R2s especially, how can they unlock cloud to researchers to qualify or satisfy grants more, right? So how can they do better, bigger research projects? And then probably I think the third one, based in, and again, I'm presenting with Texas A&M and University of Maryland, Baltimore County, UMBC tomorrow, is identity. So the same thing, right, is how do you provide that unified experience across all 3 cloud providers, since they have footprints in all of them, right? And that literally, if not, becomes those same 3-4 problems in one provider, you have the same 3-4. So like it's like compounding interest, right? And so looking to solve that in a unified way is the only way in which organizations will actually be able to adopt and scale.
Why? Okay, I thought I had that. I thought that was the found question, but why does everybody have a footprint in all three? Why is there not exclusive relationships? Like, what's the benefit?
Yeah.
Are there different flavors? I mean,
yeah. So
these are all electrons.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think when public cloud first started to come out, right, it was all about infrastructure as a service, or IaaS, and it was pretty much a level playing field, right? I don't want to host this server in my data center, and I want to host it in your data center, and it was apples to apples to apples. But now, as I mentioned, like with managed services, which are complete applications built on top of cloud that are just offered as SaaS, right? Now they're all unique, right? Like, I don't think that there's any question that Google is incredibly good at like big data, like one of their services, BigQuery, is incredibly awesome at like large data sets, data visualization, right? Whereas maybe AWS is focused on whether it's large storage or really fast like ability to send like events across different apps, for example. Every cloud sort of has its niche, right? On the Microsoft side, they've done a really good job in making like a one-click button from your on-prem database SQL to the cloud, right? That's going to give them that edge in that area. And so it's now apples to oranges to lemons, right? And ultimately, again, in higher ed, the administrative side of just running the business, right? That's typically one that we don't want to be in a data center. We're probably going to almost exclusively be in a provider. But ultimately, when you start bringing in the research side and ultimately the academic side, it's those sort of managed services that force you into those areas. And again, ultimately, if IT and universities don't embrace it, that's not going to stop researchers from getting there, right? So you might as well, if you can provide a solution that gives them secure, unified access to it, then you're in control, right? And that's really all about what it is. It speaks to the well-managed ranch of the Wild Wild West is how do you maintain control effectively? So
we will find out at 4 p.m. tomorrow.
Yes, exactly.
Randy Shore, thank you so much for coming by. You are the VP of Delivering Support at Kion.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Have a great day.
Yeah.
Thanks again for joining me for the eLearn podcast. Make sure you never miss an episode by subscribing wherever you listen to podcasts. Just push subscribe on your player right now. And remember, you can join the conversation live on YouTube, Facebook, and my LinkedIn feed every week. I hope to see you there. Thanks.